Okay, so this is the third staff conference, Engage staff conference, I think, that we've held. It's certainly going to bigger and better successes, some great speakers, great contributions. I was able to attend a number of sessions yesterday, very impressed with the quality and engagement, and it's so good to have such a wide diversity of sessions that people can choose from. So before I get on the way, something really intrigues me. I just found the Swiss Army knife. Did anyone lose it? Right at the front here. Did you lose it? It might be yours. Okay. I'll leave it here for you to collect. Yes. Yeah, I thought maybe somebody got a little bit upset with the computer system. And, okay, there's still seats at the front. Okay, so a number of topics to cover, and we'll get stuck in. I'm going to cover, as you would expect, how we're doing with recruitment, looking at all the different cohorts that we have. I'm going to look at the current higher education landscape, which is, as we all know, very uncertain, very much in flux. I'm going to look at, given the fact that we are in such a state of flux, what could be best case scenarios, what could be worst case scenarios for the sector, for the university, what are the kind of things that might befall us, and how would we respond. That is actually also part of an exercise that we will be doing as a senior management team at the annual Board of Governors Strategy Day this year, later on. So this is a little bit of a dry run. And if there's anything in there that you think is completely off the wall, tell me, because then I might be able to change it. We're going to look at Campus 2025 and hopefully some time for Q&A. And if you wonder what the photo is, that is actually World's End, which is a little road quite near here, on the way to the back road up the Horseshoe Pass. That's where that was taken. So where are we going? And again, if you wonder where that photo was taken, that was just a couple of weeks ago when I was away visiting Holland and spent a nice weekend in Amsterdam. And this was the gin boat. So it's one of these barges that take tourists around the canals in Amsterdam. It was very early in the morning. They didn't have any customers yet. But it looked interesting. So where are we going as regards our enrollments, and what does the picture look like? So what this graph will tell you is there's still a bit of work to do, although in some areas we're doing really well. The one on the left that's looking at the new entrance. Now, of course, that is still very much moving as we speak. When I prepared these graphs, I was using the figures from first thing Monday morning this week. But since then, the new entrance bar, which is the one on the far left, the red one on the far left, the blue one was the target. Of course, we're not at the target yet, but it's still continuing. And as of this morning, the position is that we're now almost at 900. On the graph, it doesn't say 900, it's somewhere below that. So it's moving all the time. The target for new entrants, full-time undergraduate new entrants for this year is 1,066. It'll be challenging to get there. We may not quite hit that, but we'll certainly be a lot closer than this particular graph shows. The next one is the total number of returners so far. And that is more or less where we want to be at this stage. I looked at my slides from last year, and this time last year we were still about 100 or so behind the actual target for returners at the time, and that, or maybe a little more. We wound up slightly below target in the end, but there were still 100 or so additional returners that finalized their re-enrollment between the 17th of September last year and the middle of October census date. So I would expect that we'll probably do a little bit better on the returning number of students than we had anticipated and budgeted for, which would be excellent news if that was to be the case. We shall see. Then some numbers on undergraduate, postgrad students, undergraduate part-time students, new entrants, returners, more or less level pegging about where we want to be. And the two on the right-hand side look at students. Yeah, the postgraduate students. That is actually a much higher number this year. the postgraduate taught students than last year. Reason being that the applications and enrollments with our WGU Online program have really taken off. So the target for this year is clearly much higher than it would have been this time last year. So even though we haven't hit that target yet, that is simply to do with the fact that many of the students on WGU Online enroll in the course of the year as new modules are coming on stream. So it's a carousel model, and some of you are more familiar with it than others. But that does mean that we won't actually hit the number that we're planning for until much later into the academic year. But I'm confident that we will get there, and I'll even stick my neck out and say we'll probably exceed it. It's going so well. Okay, so that's on that particular area. And then looking at other cohorts. Now, I've already mentioned WGU Online, which is, if you look at, and this graph compares last year's numbers in those categories to this year's numbers. So it doesn't compare targets versus actual, it compares last year's numbers versus what we're seeing this year. Part-time undergraduate on the left, that isn't yet where we wound up last year, and that is quite simply, again, because enrollments happen much later in the course of the year. I would hope that that'll pick up. Having said that, it's the way it's going. It's a little bit behind this point in time last year, so I would be surprised if we exceed the total of last year, but hopefully it'll pick up more. WGU Online, as I've already mentioned, international students numbers are still quite low, but we're hoping to improve on that. We're investing in that area. We now have a network of agents that is functioning, that is working, but it does take a while to build that up. St. Mary's, we have our teacher education program, the Qualified Teacher Status program, up and running now, and of course also the PGCE for the second year, and that is now bringing us upwards of 35 students that we didn't have last year. So again, that's good. And degree apprenticeships, likewise, we embarked on a new degree apprenticeship program before the summer with cybersecurity and IT. We now also have engineering, and we're still recruiting onto the program. We got notification from HEFCU quite late on that we were allocated 54 full-time degree apprenticeship places, mostly in engineering and some more in IT as well, and also another 35 in partnership with Neath Port Talbot College. So that's a significant increase to our portfolio. And then the biggest one of all is T&E, transnational education, franchise programs, and that is a real growth area across a range of countries, Malaysia, Myanmar, Dubai, and a few more. So that area is really evolving. So all these other cohorts will still build during the year. So these are quite conservative estimates and projections, and we're likely to do a little better than that. Okay, so something else that I look at every year is where do students from Northeast Wales go? And it's still the case that Northeast Wales is a net exporter of students. The majority of students from Northeast Wales leave Northeast Wales to study either in other parts of Wales or in other parts of the UK. So that's not necessarily a picture that we want to see, and we're doing our best to try and improve on that. So these are figures for 2017-18, because there's always a time lag between getting the data and when it actually happened. But it is a little bit better than the year before, a couple of % or so. But it's work in progress. And where do they then go, the students from Northeast Wales? We are actually the biggest provider for Northeast Wales, and that's something to be proud of. 23%, just about a quarter, similar to the picture the year before and the year before. So we're not losing any ground, even though, as you're well aware, over the past 2 or 3 years, it is a struggle to bring in sufficient student numbers on the mainstream undergraduate programs. But that is also because the demographic is still against us, and it'll take 2 more years looking at the throughput through the school system for those numbers to pick up again. But we are maintaining our slice of the pie, and that is good. A little bit of movement as regards our competitors. So this year, for instance, Chester has gained a percentage point, MMU has lost a percentage point, but it's swings and roundabouts, really. And you can see how our key competitors are. Okay, moving on to the next topic. Searching the higher education landscape. Now that's quite a job, and you really need, you actually need binoculars. You need some pretty significant sight equipment. In fact, I should engage optic to help me survey from a great distance, because it is hard. This was all, by the way, also taken during my recent weekend in Amsterdam with a few friends, where we visited, and this was one of these 18th century replica colonial ships that the Dutch were also battling with the British at sea. Those days are going to come back if we're not careful. Okay, so what can we see? So I'm going to beg, steal and borrow quite heavily from the University's UK conference, which took place last week, where we had a range of speakers about all sorts of different topics, and I've put them all up there. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I've selected some of these topics because they are particularly relevant for us, and I'm also going to go into our position on some of them. And of course, these slides will be circulated, and I appreciate people want to take pictures now. Absolutely. Put it on Twitter, of course. Do you remember the hashtag? WGU Engage 2019. Good. So this was the UUK conference last week. A bundle of excitement. It was at Birmingham University. Now this is significant. Just remember that. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, about the fact that it was in Birmingham. So I've split it up into 3 sections: the good news, the not so good news, and some challenges and uncertainties. So I'm going to start with the good news. The first point being, and this was actually reported the evening before the conference, that there has been a major government policy shift on post-study work visa for international students. So up till now, it has been the case that any international student finishing their studies, unless they were offered a job with earnings of over £30,000, now what graduate is offered a job at over £30,000? Very few. So unless that was the case, they had to go straight back home. Now that's not competitive, because if you go to Canada or Australia or many other countries, there would have been opportunities for recent graduates to stay on and find a job, get a work permit for a while. That was taken away by Theresa May. It did exist in the past. It was taken away by Theresa May. And as long as she was still Prime Minister, that was never going to change. So that has now changed, and the announcement was made by an individual called Gavin Williamson. So just a quick check. Does anyone know who Gavin Williamson is? No, you know. Senior management, yes. The senior management should know who these people are. Right, I'm going to go. Who is Gavin Williamson?
Defence Secretary that got sacked.
Correct. Yes. What is he now?
Education.
Yes, very good. So he's the Secretary of State for Education for the UK. So he made the announcement, and he was really impassioned about all of this, but he said a lot of other things too that he was very impassioned about, and I'll come to those in a moment. And also part of the good news was compelling evidence that our students do not only measure the value of a degree by their future earnings potential. Now that should not come as a surprise, but apparently to some people it does. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail on that in a second. So first, just to revisit the post-study work visa. A bit more detail on that. So you've heard some prominent politicians recently say no ifs or buts. Yeah, sounds familiar? So on this, there are no ifs and no buts. The 2-year post-study work visa will be available to any graduates from any country outside of the UK from 2020, no matter what job they take. It doesn't have to be graduate level. There is no earnings threshold. There isn't any other restriction that it needs to be relevant to their program of studies. The university doesn't have to track where they are or where they intend to go. Nothing to do with UKVI, we can leave them to it, and off they go. They do need to apply while they're still here, so they can't leave the country and then come back. They need to apply while they're still, so effectively before they are graduating. So the government does expect the sector to be more internationally competitive because, of course, higher education is now officially, under government policy, regarded as a major plank, a major pillar of the international trade strategy, the export strategy. And of course, we're importing people and delivering education to them. We're also engaging in exporting education through T&E, but they both fall under the same category from that perspective. So that's why it's being supported. But also, what was interesting was that Gavin Williamson mentioned that one of the drivers behind this particular change is the skills shortage across whole swathes of the economy and society, and clearly the expectation that these 2-year post-study work visas will help to pick up some of that slack. And what he didn't say was, that's also because a lot of people from the EU won't be coming here anymore because of Brexit. So now instead we've got international students and graduates who will do all of those jobs. So he didn't say that, but there was a little bit of that, I think, a bit of an undercurrent. Okay, now back to that topic of what motivates students to go to university? What do they expect? And is it just about the money? Now, as I said, that should not be too much of a shock and surprise to find that students don't necessarily only go to university, into higher education, because they want to earn lots of money. There are other reasons why they do so. But why was that survey undertaken? Because of the increasingly strong emphasis in government policy on degree outcomes measured by salary. It's one of the metrics, one of the key metrics under what's known as the longitudinal educational outcomes study. It's one of the metrics underpinning TEF, league tables, etc. Now, of course, it's important that people are successful in their lives and build successful careers, but there are other things as well. And if you ask the students themselves, Generation Z, so of course they didn't ask any mature students, clearly, so it's Generation Z that was asked, salary only came 5th behind other things. Interest in the subject, looking to a fulfilling career, fulfilling lives, and enjoyment of the higher education experience itself. So it's very different, and they also indicated that work-life balance is far more important than earnings potential. And if you consider that actually Generation Z is likely to be the first generation, and already is the first generation, who will be financially worse off than their parents, that is quite interesting. So instead of being resentful on this, they're actually embracing it and saying, look, there is so much more to life than money. So I put a comment up there, did we not know this already, and is Generation Z unique? Probably not, but it's certainly an interesting outcome, and you would hope food for thought for policymakers. Okay, moving on. The not so good news. And I'm sure you picked this up in the recent past, that the sector is being slapped on the wrist about 2 things. Degree inflation, so the much higher increasing percentages of students graduating with a first-class degree or a first-class honours degree or a 2.1, and also about the unconditional offers, and particularly the conditional offers. And these are offers which are made to students regardless of the A-level results they actually subsequently achieve. They're offered a place, but on the condition that they don't engage with any other university. So that is a sales technique which is not really very ethical. So, and this is where it's interesting to mention again that the conference was at Birmingham, because it was actually the University of Birmingham who started all of this a few years ago. So they are the ones who were absolutely guilty of it, and then lots of others followed suit. But that would have been just a touch embarrassing, perhaps, for the hosts that this was so prominent in that particular session, and in the narrative around it, and also in the media. And then, of course, on the not so good news topic, Brexit, we were given lots of assurances again. We will continue to engage with Erasmus. Absolutely, we're talking about it all the time with our colleagues in Brussels. We will still have access to research funding, Horizon 2020. What was not mentioned was we will still support universities in their recruitment of EU students, which to us is clearly very important, but that didn't get a mention. But of course, we know what's happening in reality at the moment, and it's not looking as if all of these things are going to be so smoothly continued. We don't know where it's going to go. But listening to the ministers on the day, it's always under control and quite good. So the next morning, you probably won't be able to see that, but anyway, that was the Times. And in the Times, the unconditional offers came in for severe criticism. And the news that was communicated on the front page of the Times was that the unconditional offers had been ditched by a university in the bribes row. So that was University of Birmingham. So there and then, on the day, they decided that they were no longer going to be making conditional offers. And it's very likely that, again, the rest of the sector will follow suit and follow their example and lead again. So where do we stand on this, you may wonder. So what's our position on the conditional, unconditional offers? We don't make them. We're not guilty. Never done it. Not doing it now, never done it. What we do have is a contextualized admission system. We look at the background, socio-economic background of students who come to us. We take that into account. We take into account their personal circumstances. We have conversations with them. And yes, that may involve softening the entry grades requirement into particular programs. It all depends on the circumstances. And we look at the individual. We have all the other supports, such as the applicant days, the confident learner, which ran over the summer, and obviously the peer support once the students are here, which is a lot more effective, a lot more targeted, and a lot more fit for purpose. So the next slide is one I pinched from Claire, who did a presentation on this a while back, looking at all the various the stages in the process of a student coming to recommending do university, and how we support them through that particular timeline and make those contextualized offers. So in this particular instance, we did make a lower tariff offer to that particular student based on the context and the things that were going on. At the end of the day, the student got A-level results which would have got him there anyway, but it did mean that he had the confidence and the sense of support that probably actually made him perform better at these A-levels. It can work like that as well. So the student came to the university and did very well. So that's what we do. So if anyone ever challenges you, what about those horrible, unethical conditional offers? Not guilty. Just remember that. And what about degree inflation then? Well, degree inflation, as I mentioned, it's about the increased proportion of students coming out with quality awards. We are the blue line in that graph, and the other lines represent sector averages for Wales and for the UK as a whole. And as you can see, our graph is also heading in an upward direction, but we are still below the averages that are shown right around the sector. And we can also explain why we have seen over the years improvement in the grades that students achieve and the degree classification that students achieve. It's to do with the profile of our cohorts, for instance. Over the past number of years, we've seen an increasing number of EU students in engineering which have come out with very, very good degrees, for instance, as a proportion of our student population, which clearly pushes up the mark. We've put in place more supports, retention supports, as well as access and support. So we have there's a whole host of reasons which can help to clarify why we see a particular trend in the classification of our degrees. And we need to explain that, and rightly so. And of course, the Funding Council Wales is asking all the universities what their position is, and can we explain why we are where we are in that trend. And we have done so, and I think it's a strong explanation. Okay, moving on then to the challenges and uncertainties. Philip Auger. Any idea who poor Philip is? He didn't get much of a mention at that conference anymore. We know who he is, the Auger Review. So he is actually a former banker who voluntarily took on the role of chairing a review for the post-tertiary, the tertiary sector, the post-compulsory education sector in England, looking at funding of higher education and further education. So they delivered their report a few months ago, more in a moment, about some of the key recommendations and what they might mean for us. But the key point here is, didn't get much of a mention. Now, of course, we've had a succession of different ministers and clearly changes to the political landscape, and that doesn't always augur well for reports which are commissioned by one minister 2 ministers ago, and then what do you do when the report actually lands on someone's desk who isn't really that interested in it anymore? Because actually we are 3 further ministers down the line, because as well as the Secretary of State for Education, there's also the, in England, the Minister for Universities and Science and Innovation. Okay, another quiz question. Do you know who that is at the moment? Any offers? Yes, Chris Skidmore. Heard of him before? Again, yes. So what's interesting now, it's almost like the carousel model that we have for WGU Online. We can also see that with ministerial appointments in Westminster, because Chris Skidmore was Minister for Universities and Science previously, but before him there was somebody who was there for quite a short stint as well. You might have missed it, you might have been on holiday because he was only there for maybe 3 weeks. Who was that? Joe Johnson. And he had been Minister for Universities and Science and Innovation previously as well. Now his baby was TEF. So when he came back in, when his appointment was announced in July, when Boris Johnson came in as PM, there was a shudder of anxiety that rippled through the sector. Joe Johnson is back. We're now going to see a real step up in the pressure on universities to drive on with the implementation of subject-level TEF, which is a nightmare, because it would mean that you have, instead of having to write one TEF report for the university at provider level, we'd have to write, in our case, 20, something like that. That's a task which would not be something that we have time for, to be frank. And in England, it would be mandatory, because to be registered as a university with the Office for Students, that's the regulator and funder, you have to have a current TEF rating, otherwise they won't look at you. You would be delisted. Now that's not the case in Scotland, and it's not the case in Wales. So for us, it's optional, which is a relief. So what will TEF look like? What purpose will it serve? Nobody knows, because we've got a different minister now who wasn't all that hung up about TEF. Will it be UK-wide? Unlikely, given what I've just explained. The last provider level TEF might be awarded in 2020 is a speculation. Again, there is a review which hasn't yet been made public, looking at how fit for purpose TEF is, what are some of the caveats, particularly on subject level. We haven't seen the outcome of that review yet, but the speculation is that there will be subject level TEF, will be phased in from 2021. Mandatory for English universities only. For us, it would be next to impossible to engage with it. So let's be honest. And we did participate in the pilot. We gave it a chance. We evaluated it. It does give you some useful data. I mean, anything can be useful and interesting, but that doesn't necessarily make it worthwhile to do. So I'm going to come back again to Augur, because it should not be underestimated what Augur, if it is followed through, what that would mean. So there is a recommendation in the Augur review that the tuition fee would be lowered to £7,500 for undergraduate students, but also that there would be government top-ups for the universities. But that would depend on perhaps mix of subjects. It might depend on TEF. It might depend on longitudinal educational outcomes. Who is to say? It might depend on quality of the degree as it's perceived. It might depend on where universities are based. It might be skewed towards areas that need a little bit of support. There could be all sorts of different policy interpretations of who and how would be worthy of this additional top-up. That's not clear because the Augur review panel actually left that to the policymakers. They simply said it should be X. There should be the same quantum of money should be available still for the sector, but that can be divvied up differently, and it's entirely up to policymakers how that will be done. And Wales would have to follow suit, and that's because of technical reasons. To do with the devolution settlement and Barnett consequentials and all sorts of complicated calculations. But yes, Wales would have to follow suit. That's the top and bottom of it. Another key recommendation would be to restore the maintenance grants and part-time funding for English students. Now, we already have them here. We have a very good maintenance grant system, support system for students, and we also have part-time funding. So to us, well, I suppose there would be a risk and an opportunity. The opportunity would clearly be that we would be able to recruit English students from across the border, just within our natural catchment area, onto programs that would have these better maintenance grants. It might bring in more widening participation students that we're currently missing, and it might also bring students in on part-time programs. But of course, all the English universities across the border would also be able to tap into all of those additional and better opportunities. So it's not clear what would happen. And then a third key recommendation, which would be quite a worry, that funding for foundation programs would be removed. Now, there was a review into this about 2 or 3 years ago in Wales, and the conclusion was drawn at the time that should not be done, that foundation degrees within universities, and of course we have a significant proportion of our students on these foundation degrees. Last year we had about just over 30% of our new intake last year was onto foundation degrees. So it would be a serious, serious problem for us if the funding fell away. And if they would either have to go straight into first year, and if they're not yet academically able, then that would entirely cut off that particular pathway. Now, we're not the only ones who would be seriously worried about this, because actually, as it turns out, within Universities UK as a whole, there is a very, very strong level of opposition to this recommendation. And it's not just the widening participation universities, it's not just the post-92s. There are a number of Russell Group universities that also offer foundation degrees. So there is a very strong concerted effort, and there is currently research being undertaken by UUK to build the evidence base in order to be able to counter that argument, should it look like that recommendation might be accepted by government, which we don't know yet, because the government has not yet responded to the review and its recommendations.
Is that foundation year or foundation degree?
Foundation year. Foundation year. Foundation year, so foundation year as we know it. Yeah. But they can be offered as foundation degrees in their own right as well. I think that's a slightly different model, but it amounts to the same thing as level 3.
Well, the foundation degree that I know is level 4 and 5.
Oh, I see. No, it's level 3 we're talking about here. Yeah, right. Level 3. Yeah. Okay, so that's Augur, and we await decisions. It had initially been mooted that there would be a response from government to these recommendations as part of the public sector expenditure review. That was going to be put back to 2020. That's now been brought forward again to 2019. That's why the Parliament has been prorogued, so all of these plans can be hatched and announcements can be made. So we may know quite soon. Or there might be complete silence as well. I wouldn't discount that possibility. Now for a bit of future gazing. So this is really looking at the different scenarios. We're at such a crossroads in so many different ways in the sector, in the country, and of course at each individual university also as a result. So what might the future look like? The first one, the diamond-studded scenario. And of course, you've all heard of the Diamond Review in Wales, which is being implemented right now. That's why our students have much better maintenance and support grants. And that's why we're already seeing some additional funding coming into the universities. For instance, this year we have a little bit of extra money for what are deemed to be high-cost subjects. So for some of our engineering subjects, we get a little bit of extra money in, which is good. So what else under the diamond stud scenario? There's a few points. Clearly, plenty of money around. So Brexit didn't turn out so bad. Populist politics are dead. The Daily Mail goes to the wall. No, sorry, didn't say that. Booming economy. Everyone really forgot about Augur. Next year's conference, he gets no mention at all. This year was 2 minutes. Next year, nothing. And of course, we invest. We have a brand spanking new campus. We're still the UK #1 university for social mobility, so we don't move away from our identity and profile. No matter what the world looks like, we are who we are and we have our strengths. A developing portfolio, all the new initiatives that we're now taking, such as WGU Online, additional T&E, all of that is truly additional, as in it brings in additional revenue, but the students, the traditional students, if you like, also keep coming in large numbers. We are awarded research degree awarding powers, industry collaborations. We have the North Wales Growth Deal. Yes, we get our new engineering lab. We get all our investment in optic and upgrades of the equipment. And then there's even more money. So let's bid again and let's get some more. So you know, it's the sky is the limit. Some of this may well happen. Probably not all of it. But the world isn't all good or all bad. There will always be elements of positives and negatives. But this is, thinking it through, this is genuinely a best case scenario. Now the thing about scenario planning is, there has to be an element of realism in it. So it needs to build on things that are already happening now and could take a particular turn. So it has to be tangible, realizable, and credible. So yes, this is credible. It may not be quite so good, but it is credible. Okay, on the other side of the coin, Bleak House, the famous novel by Charles Dickens. Depressing, windswept, dark, cold, no food in the house, no logs on the fire. Everyone is really, really depressed. Brexit turned out to be a disaster, which is, you know, on a daily basis, it looks as if it might well become. And of course, everything else just goes down with it, because that means there is no injection of additional public sector funding. And there is so much economic turmoil as a result, and so many different sectors of the economy and society are struggling. Farmers need to be supported, bailed out. Airbus closes its doors. We've got thousands and thousands of people made redundant. So it really is absolutely terrible. And at the same time, we have our new tertiary education council for Wales, the successors to HEFCU. And there is an army of civil servants there And they like nothing better than to pour over. We've only got 9 universities, actually 8 universities to manage, because the OU sits under the OFS. Only 8 universities to manage, and they can look over our shoulders continuously and ask us to report up all the time. So micromanagement is draining away all of our energy. So is it all bad? Well, actually, there are still a few little glimmers there. Of course, yes, we need to look very critically at our program portfolio. We need to look carefully at what we can continue to do. But there are opportunities as well, because if there is a situation where there isn't full employment or next to full employment, there will be a requirement for retraining, upskilling. There will be, whichever way it goes, there will be government-funded schemes for that to be done. Education would be absolutely pivotal to the survival strategy of a nation. So I'm not giving up hope, but even if the world looks like a bleak house, there will still be opportunities for us, and more importantly, we have a role to play. We would have a really important role to play in all the strengths that we have today, when we don't have the completely positive diamond stud scenario or the completely negative bleak house. We're sort of flatlands, we're chugging away and we're developing. We have an identity, we have strengths, and we have plans and ambitions. We would need to clearly adjust, but we would adjust and adapt, and we would still be able to offer strengths and serve our communities. So that would be my mindset, and I hope that would be your mindset as well, if this kind of a scenario came to pass. And I can also share with you, and as most of you probably know, I spent about 10, 12 years working in Ireland. I was there in 2008-9 when the economy collapsed almost overnight, when all public sector organizations and education, higher education was part of the public sector there, and still is. We had cutbacks of up to 20-25%. People's salaries were slashed. It was a very, very difficult scenario, and we had to respond as a sector, and we had to engage with retraining, offering retraining for people out there in the community who were struggling. And we did well, and we managed to play a very important role, and that can be very rewarding, clearly. So that's the scenario planning. I mentioned earlier that we are going to be doing some of that as part of our annual Board of Governors Strategy Day, where we'll be presenting some of this. Of course, we'll be quantifying it as well. So we have our 5-year approved budgets and forecasts based on the kind of flatland scenario of, things are going reasonably okay, we just keep doing what we're doing. But we're also going to present what would those figures look like under diamond studded. What would those figures look like under bleak house? How can we stress test that? And what would we need to do in order to mitigate the position? So all of that is work in progress. Finally, and I'm almost out of time. So back to today, or actually Sunday. Can you see that slide? Can you see the visual? So that's Colliers Park, officially due to be opened on Sunday, which is the FAW, and obviously Wrexham University project to redevelop Colliers Park. So that's officially opening on Sunday. Our students this year will be using it, students on the sports science football coaching program, state-of-the-art facility, and we're very proud to be able to offer that. It's a big investment, and it's mainly FAW money, I have to be honest. It's mainly FAW money, although we did also invest some funding ourselves in the upgrade of equipment and some of the training facilities, but it's mainly FAW money. So it's their training academy, but we have a contract with them that we use it during term time for our needs, and the student union will be able to have access some of the time as well for their sports societies. Other things, of course, B Corridor. The last couple of days we've all been able to admire the fantastic state-of-the-art new teaching facilities, lecture rooms, flat classrooms, flat spaces on B corridor, and they are completely different from 12 months ago, I must say. Improved Wi-Fi, various minor capital works where various departments have been able to bid for funding, so that's all in process. So, that was that. Enjoy the academic year. I'm sure we all will.